I'll talk to you on Friday.
I'm sorry again. I couldn't get out there. I forgot about the early thing, so I gotta
Yeah.
up another time.
Okay.
All right, welcome everybody to our first live stream. Not first live stream Zoom study session in 2 weeks, because last week, of course, we met in person. We have the new schedule that we're going to send out, so it's going to be once a month in person. The next one, though, has been moved. It's going to be November 10th at Sheila Weinberg's house. It will still be on Zoom and on YouTube. I'll figure it out. I didn't do a very good job of it last time, but
Yeah.
everything is difficult in technology the first or second time. So what we decided to do today is talk about great Jewish museums in the world, which is a really interesting topic, because I decided, instead of just talking blandly about them, I would talk a little bit about the ones that I have visited, and then we'll invite people to share places they visited and interesting things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ones that I'm really interested because the museums were great, or because I had a particular experience there, but not just going step by step. Here's this museum, like. So if you go on some of the lists, I saw at least 128 Jewish museums on the biggest list. And then as I went down the list, I noticed there was probably about 20 museums I'd been to that they didn't have on the list. So there's a lot of Jewish museums out there that not everybody knows about. Ours was on this list. So there's at least 128 plus 20. So we're probably minimally 150 that I know of. There's probably twice that many, thinking of all the smaller ones. We'll talk a little bit more about the museums from different places in the world, and we can talk a couple about the ones in America. Some of the most obvious things about the museum is that, of course, the number one topic spoken about at these museums is the Holocaust. It's a lot of them, thank goodness, that they're propping up, not just in America, but in a lot of places around the world. They even have reference to it in, say, places like Cambodia, where they reference the Holocaust Museum in Israel. So the Holocaust is probably by far the most often spoken about topic, but not the only one. A lot of places are there to introduce people to Judaism. And so I thought I'd go over a couple of them and see if you've been there, what your experience. So the first one I'm going to talk about, of course, is one of the most famous ones. And I think for anybody who has been to Amsterdam, you've gone there. I've gone there twice. And this, of course, is the Anne Frank House, which is an extraordinary place to visit for many reasons. One, because the story is so famous. It is one of the few museums in Amsterdam that stays open after 5. I think it has to stay up to 8 or 10 because there's so many people who want to go see it, which is a really incredible honor to her and her story. It is, if you haven't been there, it's basically the house and the secret room where they lived. And what's interesting for me is I've been there twice. I was there in the early 90s, and then I was there the year before, right before I came here in 2012, and they had really completely redone the place. Obviously, the secret door was still there, the bookcase that's a secret door. But again, they decided to redo it and just tell the story again in such a different way. And although I didn't remember exactly how they changed it, it's really strange to be in this room where she wrote her diary, this little place behind the very famous bookcase that looks like something out of a 1947 secret agent movie, and to realize that pretty much everybody who was in this room died except for Otto Frank, and then who had somehow the idea of publishing this diary, and then, of course, making this place a museum years later. And it's really just quite a different place. He opened it. It was opened in 1960. But Otto Frank insisted that when he opened it, the annex would kind of stay empty to get the feel of it, although they put some pictures and things up there. It's really very hard to believe that 8 people were able to hide in this place for several years before they got caught. And the way they got caught was such a shame. And I believe there's a burglar in the house he got arrested for something else. He said, "I can if you let me off, I can tell you where some Jews are hiding," and that's how they were caught. So it's a beautiful story of fortitude, which is such a sad story when you realize that everybody there died. We've all seen the play. We've seen the movie. They had the play here. I think the last year they had plays before COVID-19, and they invited me to go over to make sure all the Hebrew. Ron, were you part of that as well?
Excuse me. I wanted to say that Arlene and I were there. And the thing that impressed me the most is that the very large crowd, as soon as the tour opened, there was total respect. You didn't hear a word. Even the kids were quiet, especially when you walked up the steps. It's something that we would never forget.
And it's amazing that this little girl became so famous, yet, had no idea her fame came so much after her life. So it's a little harrowing, but again, she may be the most famous person who suffered through the Holocaust. I mean, there are others. Yes, Flossie.
I think another thing about her diary, Rabbi, is that she was just a young girl and we're dealing with one, rather than many times there are very large numbers. And I think that people can identify with her and the people that were in the annex. And I wanted to say, the play you're talking about was at the Repertoire Theater, am I right? Yes. We went and we thought it was wonderful. And what they did was they kept the actors on the stage, if you remember, during the intermission. Right.
Oh, I didn't see it. I saw the rehearsal. So I didn't actually.
Well, they kept them there. And you felt that they were there, like she might make coffee, they get up. It was not like a play. It got dark, there was an intermission. It showed it was continual. It was a very gripping, right feeling of how they did it with that.
And also just to think that 8 people in these little rooms for several years, Larry.
I recall, was there some controversy that the father did not want to release the entire diary because there was some question about the girl's sexuality in it, that, growing up as a teenager. Do you recall that?
Yeah, there's
do you know where the original diary is?
Yeah, the entire diary was not published. I think the excerpts were put out years later, and it does deal with that. She has some harsher comments that were taken on it as well. But, she's a little girl.
Right. Well, the ending is, of course, so beautiful. I mean, as I recall, the words were sort of like, despite everything, I believe, people are good. That just resonates. At least that's in the play. I don't know how the diary ends.
Yeah. So that, that's just an incredible thing. And also the woman who saved them or fed them or brought stuff to her only died a few years ago. Meepy Geist died. She was over 100, maybe 6 years. No, maybe it was longer because I think it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I was at my last. No, I can't remember now. Meepy Geist. Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, you're right. She died very close to 100, I believe. But she wrote a book herself, which is very interesting. I'd recommend reading that because it's from her point of view of what happened and what took place. And they never did find the culprit who betrayed them. Quite interesting. It felt so many people were suspects and so many people they looked at, but it could have been a very simple thing by an outsider.
Tell with her talking to the German when he arrested them.
Oh, yeah.
The same thing.
She was from, I think it was, she was Austrian, and the SS man or the Gestapo man who arrested them at the place was from her same town. I think it was Vienna. They were both from Vienna, and it's actually the only reason she wasn't arrested and taken in.
And because of that, also, there's some people who accused her of being the one to give them up, but she wasn't.
No,
Oh, that's sick.
no, it's, well, like I said, everybody was accused at one point or another, but
Right.
it certainly, well, you'd have to read her book too.
Well, and that's just one of the places that, so let's go over a couple of the other ones, and then we'll invite you guys to sell. So obviously I want to do one in Israel. And when we led a trip to Israel a couple of years ago from the synagogue, you know, there's a couple of set things that everybody does, obviously Dead Sea, Masada, the old city. And then they give you some, you know, options for other things you want to do. Do you want to do a kibbutz that was on the border with, you know, which was a kibbutz on the border with the West Bank during the 67 and 73 war. We went to the Golan, but I wanted to do Ammunition Hill. I don't know if everybody's ever seen that, because it's not very well known, but when you see it, it quickly becomes the highlight of your trip, or one of the highlights of your trip. And it looks like Michael's been there. I've been there many times, and every time I'm just amazed. So what is this place? It's a small little place in Israel where they made bullets. So Flossie's been there as well. So, and it's a really interesting story. It's one of those, even when you leave, you may not remember the details, but you remember the general gist of what's going on. So what's going on is we've got the 1930s, we've had a world war, and Israel is not allowed, the Jews are not allowed to have arms, so they are making their own bullets. And they have to figure out how to make them, so they dig a place right underneath a little kibbutz thing, a little village, and they use it to build bullets. So you can go underneath to this bullet factory, and not everybody there who lived in this kibbutz even knew that was there. And they had to figure out the best way to hide the sounds, so they put it under their laundry room. But then they realized there wasn't enough laundry to keep the machines running, because they needed more time to do bullets. So they had to figure out, how do we do more laundry? Well, we'll go to the base of the English soldiers that are right next to us and offer to do their laundry. So they're doing laundry of the people who they're trying to hide the bullets from. And they did this for several years. They somehow managed to navigate it where people were underneath for like 2 hours at a time, and nobody noticed they were gone because they were supposed to be in the fields. It was a very organized way of doing it. And it's incredible, because a lot of the bullets that were in the Independence War came from there. Jeff.
I got the opinion, Rabbi, when I was there and they were talking about the plans. The whole thing was planned. The kibbutz was planned around the factory. The factory was the central idea, but there were two parts of it. They were going to build this hidden factory, and they'd put the kibbutz over it to disguise it. So I think the idea of the bullet factory came first, and then how to cover it up. And very few people on the kibbutz, half the kibbutz, or most of the kibbutz, did not know it was even there. They went around their general business and did everything. And only the select few who worked there, and they had sun lamps in it.
That's what I was gonna
Right,
say.
they had sun lamps inside the kibbutz, so you'd work under sun lamps all the time. Yeah, inside the factory. So the people, you know, wouldn't come out looking white all the time, and their fellow workers were wondering, how come you're not getting suntan like us?
They thought of everything.
And if anybody did figure out from the kibbutz, they just became part of the workers. You know,
Right.
like 2 or 3 people figured it out or noticed something was going on. And so they just told them the secret, and they started working there as well. And so you need people on top to be the cover, to warn if anything's going on. And it was right. Yes, Michael.
No, I just wanted to thank Jeff for talking about the sun lamps. I
I
thought
forgot
that
about
was,
that part.
I thought that was like the cherry on top of the sundae. It just emphasized or showed the incredible planning that went into that. and the spiral staircase at one side and all that. I thought it was one of the best places I've seen in Israel, aside from some of the religious sites or historical sites.
You think about the guns being the issue. How are we going to get guns? Well, they could get more guns. They just couldn't get bullets. Flossie.
I was going to say it's just a tribute to Jewish ingenuity. No, really, Michael likes that.
It's one of the most obvious ones of all time.
And we were there, and even down to, like Michael said, the sun lamps, like they're thinking of everything, that these people won't stand out looking so pale compared to the others. It was, and Michael, do you remember how they slid the washing machine over? I mean, how
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I never knew it was called Ammunition Hill, Rabbi. I never heard that name.
I think it's Ammunition Hill. Or did I get confused with something else?
I'm not doubting you. I never heard that term.
I always heard it.
I agree with Floss.
What, Michael?
I seem to remember, and I could be really wrong, Rabbi.
No, that's
Ammunition
you're right.
Hill-
That was where the Jordanian thing was, right? You're right.
Yeah.
Elon Institute?
It's called the
Yeah, the Elon Institute.
Yeah, in
It's the
Jerusalem.
Bullet Factory is what it's called, basically.
Yes. Okay.
It's now the Elon Institute. My bad. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
got confused for a second.
Okay, so no, I didn't think so.
No, you're right. You're right.
We're a team here.
That's and another one that I want to mention is because somebody was talking to me the other day about the rules of burial, because I took some people on a tour of the 2 historic cemeteries that are part of our congregation. If you haven't seen them, just let me know. They're really interesting to see. And they're talking about how can you bury bodies? Do they need to be next to each other? And somebody was asking me if they could be stacked. And I said, first of all, they can be stacked in America, because if you're buried at a military cemetery, they will stack you on top or on the bottom of your spouse. So that's just how they do it. But we know that there's nothing wrong with stacking. There's no Jewish ordinance against it, because if you go to Prague and you go to the old cemetery of Prague, which is this cemetery right next to the synagogue in the area that was Jewish, and it's like 20 feet deep because they couldn't spread out. And so there's just one body buried on top of the other, maybe 10 at a time on top of each other. And I've never seen that before. And obviously it's places like Europe where land was so limited, where in America, we've never really had that problem except for maybe a few places like New York City. So for us, spreading out is no big deal. We're in Savannah. We can go build a new cemetery 15 minutes west of here and have plenty of space. But in Europe, where Jews and really everybody was very limited to the amount of space they could have. And there's some very famous people in this cemetery, but again, they're just stacked on top of each other starting in the 15th century. Rabbi Lowe is there. I mean, really, Avigdor Kara, the guy who built the Pinchas Synagogue. I looked up who else is in there. So David Oppenheim, one of the great historians. So even these people are buried on top of each other. So it's really interesting to see that in this small little space, and it is tiny, there are 12,000 people buried. 12,000. And this the space is deep, but it is so small for 12,000. I mean, I can't even imagine how you fit 12,000 people in this place. And yet they had to do what they had to do. And so it just showed me the difference between Europe and places where Jews lived, where space like America, the Wild West, was so less so. And also if you're in a ghetto, you were very limited on what you have access to. So it's so, again, if you go to Prague, you're almost definitely going to see it because it's right smack in the middle of all the Jewish synagogues, except for the one that was built in the 19th century, all the ones in the downtown area. So I just think that is a memorable place for me to visit. Another one I want to mention that I remember very, very much, which of course I just forgot now, but I'll remember in a second. was I wanted to talk about this one next. The Israel Museum. That's what I want to talk about. Is one more in Israel. This one is a very famous place. It's the Israel Museum. It's the main museum of Israel. It's in Jerusalem. It's very famous because it has the Shrine of the Book. That is the building with the big white thing on top that looks like the top of a baby bottle, but is really mimics the top of a clay tablet. We talked about that last week. So it's famous because it has the Shrine of the Book where you have the Dead Sea Scrolls. And of course, the museum itself is incredible. It has history of the area going back thousands of years, way before, even Homo sapiens were in this world. So, and in it, you have a few really incredible things that a lot of us remember besides the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is probably the most. You have the first reference to King David ever found outside the Bible. And it's on this tablet called a stele that was used as a marker. And it references a descendant of David who was, it says, from the house of David. And so that is the oldest evidence we have, and it comes about 100 years, 150 years after his death, we have of King David. You also have some really ancient things that go way beyond that. And that is, you have the first piece of artwork ever found. It's a little female figurine, and it's from 250,000 years ago. And so just to think that Israel was one of the main places where human beings became human beings. But my favorite piece from it, and you may have heard of it or I may have referenced before, and I'm going to give a picture of it real quick. We can enlarge it a little bit. There you go. Is this. This was the pride of the museum. You guys see it?
Oh, wow.
This was the pride. This was the biggest find in the museum.
Wow.
It was it was kind of like a seal from the time of Solomon. And you guys see the Hebrew writing on it? This was the oldest Hebrew writing they have referencing somebody in the Bible.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. Place. Everybody see it right here?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
right here. And this is a reference to none other than Solomon. It was the only reference to him outside of the Bible. And it was the pride. It had a special case. Besides the Shrine of the Book with the Dead Sea Scrolls, this was the pride of the museum. And everybody was always excited to see it because it's really the only thing they have from the time of David or Solomon was this seal. You have the giant brick in the Western Wall, but it doesn't say Solomon. And why has it become even more famous later? Because about 15, 20 years ago, it was proven to be a fake. The whole time it was a fake. This very well-known archaeologist, it was an old thing from like 200 years later, 300 years later. So old, but not like, unique. And they actually wrote the Hebrew on there themselves. So and there's articles you can find about it. And it's really interesting to see how even the greatest intellects were fooled by this for a very long time. I'm not how many years it was in there, but very long time. And it reminded me of that. There was a very famous Japanese archaeologist who got caught. He was like the one guy who always found the best stuff. I read the article. It referenced what happened in Israel in it. For years, he was always finding, and a few people were just like, there's no way he can be this lucky. So they set a trap for him, and they filmed a site where he found all this stuff, and they had a video of him putting the stuff there. So what it did was, it ruined all of archaeology for a long time because it meant every single one of his finds had proven something. And so none of them could be validated now. So they had to erase everything he had done. And so even some of the things that may have been real, now they can't believe them. So it was really, so that was, yes, I went there, I saw it. Now I want to see it even more, but I don't think they have it out there anymore because I think they're embarrassed by it. Larry and then and Noel.
Yeah, just as another side story, it's not unique to Israel, of course, that these fakes and forgeries. Several years ago, when we were in England, we went over to the Victoria and Albert Museum. And if you go over to that museum, they have an entire wing that is dedicated, and it's actually called the Fakes and Forgeries.
Oh, really?
Of the museum, and they have forgeries that or fakes that have been bought up by their museum as well as other museums throughout the world, and they show them on exhibit. And one of the most famous ones actually is in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, where they have what is supposedly one of the earliest Egyptian statues. And they had thought that was a real find because they thought it was one of the earliest statues of a pharaoh. And it turned out that it's really been in contention that, how many years this could have been made, afterwards. And they look at different marks on it, what tools were used, for example, and how the carvings looked like when they were of the period. And just one step further is several years ago, we were at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And they had an exhibit of of Rembrandt paintings. And they had paintings, they had done an international survey of Rembrandt paintings. And they had looked at a group of scholars that come in and looked at all of these paintings that were in museums worldwide. And of approximately, and I'll just use the number off the top of my head, and I'm sure it's wrong, like 100 paintings, they had said 30 of them were definitely attributed to Rembrandt. There were about 20 that were probably attributed to what they called the school of Rembrandt, and there were about another 50 that they said were really in question. And these are in museums now throughout the world, where museums would pay millions and millions and millions of dollars. So yeah, the whole fakes and forgeries thing is obviously a big business. Yeah.
Yeah, the little pomegranate thing, they paid, I think, $500,000 in 1980 for it. Noel.
Yes, my opinion has always been that, and it's even more so now, that every third person alive is a scoundrel, And even now, I mean, because I picked up in Mexico City years ago these little things that I still have, and I'm thinking somebody probably threw them around for tourists to pick up and think they had something. But I still have them. It doesn't matter to me. But I can't understand these people. They're just everywhere, and it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, when you have tourist scams are going to be part of it. I remember I always read a tour book, The Lonely Guide or The Rough Guide, whenever I traveled, and they always talked about the different scams. So I'm in India. I'm in Delhi. And I'm getting ready to go I want to go on a train. And, I'd read about this exact scam. It's very rare that you read about an exact scam. And the guy comes up to me and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, the train station is closed today." And I go like, "There's about 1 million people right here getting on trains." He says, No, that's just for Indians. For non-Indians, you have to go over here and buy a ticket from this person. And then they get you to buy a ticket for an outlandish price that may or may not be a real ticket. So yeah, that's part of the scamming is part of it. But let's go to one or two others, and then I'll start. Another one that is really interesting me is the Cordoba Museum. It's the museum in Spain. There's 3 museums in that vicinity: Cordoba, Granada, and Sevilla. I got to go to Sevilla and Cordoba. I was going to go to Granada, but they had moved the museum to Cordoba. And it's really brilliant to see the architecture that is Moorish, Christian, and Jewish all mixed, because they were living there at different times. They have a big statue of Maimonides, and it's really got all these historical, really amazing objects. And I was reading an article fairly recently about the museums in Spain, the Jewish museums in Spain, and how in all of those museums, there is not a single thing, not a single item related to the Jews who lived there before 1492. All of the stuff is about afterwards, even though the museum is about the pre-1492 Jewish community in Spain before, because the authorities got rid of all the Jewish stuff. And so there's literally almost nothing left from these 500 or 600 years of incredible Jewish learning and study. So they don't have any objects. All the objects they have there are like, let me teach you about Judaism, and they bring other things in. And I was there and I didn't realize it when I was there at the time until I read this article, but it's really interesting that a lot of Jews do go to those places in Toledo, but there's really no history from the 15th century left to show beyond the buildings and that kind of stuff. So, but very interesting to see. And then the last one I'm going to talk about real quick, and then we'll go on. Well, two more. I have a lot more about it. How many of you been to that one in the States, the Tenement Music Museum in New York?
Oh, no, but that's on our list.
Yeah,
We were there.
it's really an
Always on.
incredible place because
Yeah.
it takes you on tours as if you were a person. You were a person living in 1911. You go on this tour. You're a person in 1935 during the Depression. You go on this tour. And it shows you both the homes and the neighborhood. And I am not very familiar with New York at all, but I've only been there really twice. But it shows you how this area, which is I think the Lower East Side, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Is the immigration area. So, you know, the Irish and the Scots and everybody was there for a few decades, and then the next group would. So when I was there, I'm thinking it's going to be this Jewish area. It was basically Chinatown when I was there, and I assume it's somebody else now. You know, I went to Hester Street. I went to, what's the other street that's so famous?
Well, Delancey.
Delancey. And there were no Jewish people there. I saw one pickle stand in the whole area. So it was a great surprise to me that the Lower East Side was not Jewish anymore.
He's called Mr. Pickle Man.
Is that what he's called? Yeah, I don't even know if he's still there now. It was a few years ago.
I don't know if he's still there. He may have moved to Brooklyn with everybody else.
It was the movie Crossing the Lancey. Remember?
I love that movie.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm still in love with her.
yeah. Amy Irving.
Amy,
I can't believe Steven Spielberg divorced her. Like, what do you think?
No, she's not Jewish, you know.
She is Jewish.
She is. No, I don't think she is.
I thought she was. Maybe she's not. I thought she was Jewish.
She is.
Certainly in a lot of Jewish movies. She's in Yentl. Yeah. And so the last one, and then we'll go on, is I was at the the Jewish Museum of Berlin. And I don't know if you've been to Berlin. I had a lot of hesitation going there, but I went with a friend. And so I spent a lot of time. There's two main tourist visitation sites in Berlin. You've got the stuff dealing with the Holocaust and the stuff dealing with the wall, the wall separating Berlin after World War II. And so it's almost everywhere. I went to so many different places of the Holocaust, this memorial, this is where underneath, this is where the wall was, here's a piece of the wall. And then I went to the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and it had nothing about any of it. It was basically a modern museum about Judaism, and the exhibition that was there was Jews in comic books. So I'm in the middle of Berlin reading about Jews in comic books, and it's showing me the American anti-Germany comic books from the 1940s, where Superman and Captain America are fighting the Nazis, and I'm reading it in Berlin. So it was really very, very surreal. And so those are some of the museums I remember a lot. Ron?
There's a museum in New York. It's Columbia University on the upper west side of New York. And it's a Holocaust museum, the Columbia University Holocaust. And when we were there, it was like spine chilling.
Really?
It was really done so well.
Really? All right. I like I said, I haven't been to New York very often, so I've seen very little compare. Been there twice, but only once for touring. No.
Yes, if only I could get out of Texas. In the textbooks now, they want to teach an opposition point of view about the Holocaust. This is going on right now. And I'm so horrified
It's like museums.
at what's going on in this state. If I could get out of here, it's never going to change. It just keeps, I mean, can you believe this?
It is very scary. I was reading about that if you haven't. Basically, but there's a lot of people fighting against it, thank goodness. There is a law that says you can fight, that you have to give an alternative to disputed theories, such as evolution. So since it's so disputed, obviously it's not really disputed, we have to, so one of the theories was the Holocaust existed. So if that is in the disputed category, then they're required to teach the alternative view. So it's not about stopping to teach the alternative view, it's about making sure the Holocaust is not on the same list as the evolution. And I don't think is, you know, thank goodness it may be, but a lot of the same people who are against evolution are not necessarily the no Holocaust people, I hope. So hopefully they won't get that kind of that monetary backing that has been such a part of it. But yeah, it's a very scary thing. It's a new thing that's come out recently. I was just reading about it as well, Noel, and it's very scary. All you have to do is say something, 1 + 1 is 2. That I think is controversial. So now we have to teach the 1 + 1 is 3 theory. And that's how they're working it. It's very scary. But in Houston, they have a wonderful Holocaust museum in Houston. I know I had cousins who helped to sponsor it initially. And so that's wonderful. What are some museums that you guys have seen any place in the world, Jewish museums, that really you remember fondly or negatively, or just Flossie? And then Flossie, Larry, and Michael.
In Florida.
In Israel, there is, was it the Haganah?
Yeah.
The Haganah or the Begin Museum.
No, we didn't see the.
We
Begin.
didn't see the Begin. The Haganah was really something. You went through a tunnel. You were really there with it. We enjoyed that. And I don't
Robin.
know if you saw, Rabbi, I think it's in Jaffa. They give you the experience of being, what is it, with your senses gone?
Right. Blind and
Blind
deaf.
and
Blind
deaf.
thing.
Do you know which one I mean?
I've not done it in Israel, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah. They may have been the first one to do it too, I think.
Yes,
Right.
and it is
It was copied by a lot of
mind-boggling
places.
because the people at the,
Flossie, why don't you explain what it is to everybody so they don't understand?
I'll try with Jeff's help. They want you to get a feeling of what it's like not having all your senses and seeing the world, I think, through touch, wasn't it?
Right.
It was not through seeing or hearing. And the person leading you is blind. And they even, I thought it was one of the most mind-boggling.
Right.
Go ahead, you take it.
You're in a completely dark place, plus you're blindfolded, and you're given a cane. And you have to navigate through rooms and restaurants and different things, and you can't see anything. So the object is to put yourself in the other person's place. You live this for an hour and you see how difficult, life really is. And they do this both, I think they have 3 museums there, one for the sight, one for hearing,
And one for
and
seniors.
one for senior citizens. In other words, and they have all the school children go through that one, what it's like being around senior citizens. So
We were younger when we went there. But it really.
That sounds like a great one. I have not been there. We did something for a youth group in Houston based upon, I know they brought to America, so that's great. All right, I think it was Michael then Larry, or Larry then Michael. I
It
can't
was
remember.
Larry and Michael.
Larry and Michael.
I'll defer to Larry.
I'll go on, Michael.
Okay, I'll go. Well, I was just going to mention the Jewish Museum in Athens.
Athens, Georgia, or Athens,
No,
Greece?
no, Athens, Greece, and it's actually a very small museum, and you get to it, it's right across from the Capitol, the legislature in downtown Athens, but it's unmarked. You have to know it's there because I guess they've had problems. And you knock on the door, and they probably look at you and say, see his nose, we'll let him in. And I was sort of disappointed in it at first because it was all about the Holocaust and these Greek communities. We don't normally associate Greece with a vibrant Jewish community, maybe Rhodes, but there were other Greek communities, and they were pretty much decimated. There were only a few thousand Jews left, and right now I think there were maybe 5,000 Jews in Athens, which is a fair number. But it was very small, maybe 3 or 4 rooms. It was very nicely laid out, and I was just very glad. We probably spent an hour there, which is probably half hour more than we needed to, I guess. But Eileen and I really, we really not enjoyed it, but we really soaked it up. And if you're ever in Athens, it's an easy walk from any hotel you're going to be staying in.
And did you know about it? Did the hotel tell you about it, or you just knew about it from a tour guide ahead of time? Okay.
Yeah, we knew about it from just looking and through Google. We had lots of free time in Athens, which was wonderful, and so we.
Well, that's one to go to. I've never been there, but I would love to see.
I mean, I'm still looking from about 35 years ago for the synagogue in Florence. It was before GPS. We never found it.
We were there.
A lot of time. So this was good.
All right, Larry, and then Ron.
Yeah, I was going to mention there were 4 that I jotted down that come to mind. One, of course, is the museum in Auschwitz. And obviously, it's something to actually walk through the place where, you actually saw the camps, the real sites, just like the Anne Frank house, and then go through the museum where they did collections and of the shoes and collections of the suitcases and things of that nature. I mean, it is just gripping to be in exactly that place where you're walking on the train tracks and you're walking up to the places where the selections were made and things of that nature. So just being on the site of the place, I think, is a lot different than creating a museum, in a place where people can visit, like Washington, D.C. or New York. So there are a lot of these site historic museums I think are wonderful to visit, which, not only for Jewish history, but for all kinds of history, national parks and things of that nature. The second thing that I wanted to mention is there's a recent museum in New York City, which is called the Center for Jewish History, which is actually a combination of about 5 different museums. One of them comes to mind, the YIVO Institute, and they kind of coalesced into this one museum. We happened to be there several years ago, and I think the building now is on 16th Street, which is the main headquarters, even though they do have headquarters throughout New York City there at Yeshiva University and so forth. And they were putting together the opening, excuse me, and you walk into the lobby, and they have 2 enormous art projects as you walk into the lobby of the headquarters for the new museum there. One of them is called Luminous Manuscript, and I'll just hold up the brochure that, if you could read it, that we had picked up when we were there. And apparently what this artist, Diane Samuels, had done is she creates this monstrous mural of, pardon me, of glass tiles. And you can go to YouTube and you can see how it was created, of thousands and thousands of different letters from different Jewish manuscripts throughout the world. And she had engraved them onto pieces of glass, and then she had made them into this mosaic, and she does it in the form of the way that the Jewish commentaries would be done, where they have the Bible portion in the middle, and then the commentaries by the famous writers, Hillel and Shammai and things like that around the edges of them. I'll just show up one of them, even though it doesn't show up that well. But it's an enormous project as you walk into the center of the museum. So it's just an art project. It's not historical, but it's created. And then on the floor of the museum, they had created this other work or sponsored it by this woman artist called Michelle Donner, and she goes into biblical species, the different species that are in the Bible, and she creates this magnificent floor. So as you're walking into this new center of the museum, you see this two spectacular artworks. But it's kind of like they reckon it to be the Smithsonian Institute now for Jewish history, and you can go there and you can go online. If you just look it up in Wikipedia, you can go online, and I looked up one the other day that talked about Jewish, I wouldn't call them denominations, I guess is what they called it. And even though they say many people in Judaism realize that there's more than 3 denominations, they went into literally dozens of Jewish denominations that they have listed there of small factions of Judaism that have individualized beliefs and things of that nature. But they have topics there on just about everything. So it's quite interesting. You can go online and you can look at that. The other one that I did want to mention were 2 that are in New Jersey that are not far from where we spend the summers now in New Jersey. And one is the Monmouth County Jewish Museum, which that whole area in Monmouth County became a place where there were so many Jewish egg farmers that apparently had come, these were immigrants and had come to the United States. And it became one of the major sources for egg farming in the entire world. But not only was it a Jewish place, because side by side there were Russian egg farmers. And right down the road from where we live in New Jersey there, or we have a place in New Jersey, there's also this a place called Alexander Avenue, Alexander the Tsar. And they have these Russian Orthodox style churches, like you would see in Russia, with the onion kind of domes and things of this sort. And there were Russian egg farmers. And there was a marvelous film in Temple Osa Shalom. One of the ladies, Eileen Goldberg, actually was the daughter of an egg farmer, and she grew up on an egg farm there. But the whole industry of egg farming was really a Jewish and Russian industry at the time. And the last one I wanted to mention was a little town in New Jersey that is now called Roosevelt, New Jersey. During the Depression, the Roosevelt administration had set aside money so that if a particular community had, and they tried to do at least one in every state, but if a particular community wanted to sponsor building a new community, or a particular group of people wanted to sponsor a new community in a particular area, they would set aside like funds from the federal reconstruction projects and things of that nature. And they set aside one in Roosevelt, New Jersey, that was originally started for people who wanted to get out of the city, that were garment workers. They were living in these tenement buildings that you alluded to, basically in the Lower East Side and in other places in New York. And they gave them the opportunity. Well, a group of people put in a proposal for a grant that was in Edison. That was, I forget the name of the town at the time, but they established their own town there with their own factory, and it was going to be called a co-op, just like a kibbutz. It was jointly owned, and they established this community down there. Roosevelt, New Jersey is now the remnants of that particular community. They have a small factory there. It's no longer a co-op, but it was basically the garment workers came out there. They all owned a part of the factory. They all worked side by side. They built houses that were almost identical to each other, that were basically very common style houses, just box-like houses. And you could go there. And a famous artist, and I was trying to think of his name, has created a mural now, which has become very, very famous. It's inside one of the schools, and it shows the evolution of the Jewish immigrants going into the factories and then becoming the factories in the Lower East Side, the garment workers factory, and then how they wanted to get out of the factory. So 2 famous sites.
So nearby each other. Got so much out in that area. I haven't seen either. I've only been in Jersey for dinner at an Italian restaurant, so I haven't seen much. New Jersey does have a pretty good Italian restaurant in it. Ron, you wanted to add yours?
Yeah. One, Michael, the museum in Florence, Italy, Arlene and I were there. And the first thing when you walk in, you have to go through a telephone booth that completely scans you. And everything that you, in your pockets, you have to put in a locker. And then you're allowed to go in. But it was quite an experience to see that museum. The second thing I want to say is that a lot of people don't realize how many marvelous Jewish museums we have in our country. The one I'm going to refer to is in South Florida. It's between First and I think it's around 2nd or 3rd Avenue off Washington Street in South Beach. And Meyer Lansky donated all of the
artifacts in the building.
the building.
Yeah.
Meyer Lansky donated the land and the building, a lot of artifacts, and a lot of the painted, not the painted, what they call them,
I'm not sure.
the colored windows.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And
The stained glass.
it's unbelievable who you see there who you never thought was Jewish. And so it was quite nice. And Larry, I know you enjoy going to museums in this country also, but there's a lot to offer right in our own country.
Yeah. And there's so many.
You'll pardon my voice, I can't help it.
Don't worry, you sound like a cool male's version of Stevie Nicks.
Ron, what is the name of that museum?
Ron?
I can't think the name of it.
The only thing I can remember is
I can't
Can't think of it.
see here. We've got the Jewish Museum of Florida.
We have to look it up.
in South
Miami.
in Miami, Miami Beach.
Yeah, Miami Beach.
South
Can't
Beach.
think of it.
What we got?
It's on Washington Avenue.
Okay.
Oh, that's the Jewish, it was that one, Jewish Museum of Florida. Part of,
Yeah,
it's part of Florida International University.
Yeah.
right.
It has more than 100,000 items. Very cool.
I have a question. It's interesting to me. None of us mentioned anything in France. And I was just thinking, I mean, the Bastille area was a Jewish community, and it still has, well, the last time I was there, it still had kosher butcher shops and stuff. Are there no, that anybody knows of, are there no Jewish museums in Paris? I know I didn't go to any, didn't look for any,
I'm pretty sure I went to one. I can't remember now. I'm pretty sure I went to one or an exhibition. I've been to the synagogue there. That was a good question. I'm trying to remember I remember that area you talked about. It's all Jewish places and there's the restaurants and stuff. I assume there is, but who knows? That's a good question.
In Nice, there's certainly very visible memorials to the Holocaust, but I don't think I've seen anything in Paris.
Let's see if
Doesn't matter. Just a question.
There's the Museum of Art and History of Judaism. Oh, I have been there. I have been to this building. So that's
Rabbi, I know you've traveled extensively in Africa. Were there any in Africa that you want to mention?
Yeah, there's some really interesting ones in Kenya. It's not a museum, but the synagogue section is like a corded off area downtown, which was really nice. The best museum was probably in South Africa in Cape Town. I went to Johannesburg. They have a beautiful museum right next to an old Orthodox synagogue. Because in South Africa, Orthodox and Reformed Jews do not get along or interact. It's pretty weird. But it's really interesting. They have these best candy bars, but they have a whole center there where you can go to the sanctuary. You can see the part of the history. You can have lunch. And it's right in the district of downtown where all the tourists go. Also, but my favorite one by far is in Uganda, where you go see the Abu Yadaya. If you're going to see one Jewish thing in Africa, that is the thing to see. It is. Now, there are other areas of Africa that have Jews who've been part of tribal life. Obviously, the most famous is Ethiopia, but most of them have left. But in Uganda, they're all part of descendants of a group of people who converted to Judaism in the 1920s. So Israel does not consider them Jewish. So they cannot leave and move to Israel. They're really supported by the conservative movement and the organization Kulanu. And they have several sites. I went to the main site where I stayed the night at the really nice guest house. You can go to the synagogue. You can go to the day school for elementary. You can go to the middle school and high school. You can go study in the study hall. You can go talk with and meet with the really educated leaders, which would be the rabbi and an engineer. So it's really not a museum per se, but it's a whole experience of seeing all these Jews who were from a third world country who are steadily moving up the education chain and trying to get everybody educated so they get better. The main place has, the time I went, they had already had running water. I think they had just gotten running water and maybe one building had electricity. So it's not like in one of the main cities where this is taken for granted. It's in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, if you're ever that area of the world, which I highly recommend, it's great, make sure to see the Abu Yadaya. And it's a very safe area competitive. There's one really dangerous area in Uganda, and it's not there. It's not in that area. But also one more, then I'll get to Flossie. The other great, I saw some great museums, obviously, but I went to Fez, Morocco, which blows away Marrakesh. Everybody goes to Marrakesh. Marrakesh is a lot more touristy. Fez is like a general giant Casbah. It's a major market. And they have outside of Fez a Jewish cemetery. It's one of these really cool cemeteries. And next to the cemetery, there's this building, which is sort of museum. It's very similar to what we read in Everything is Illuminated. That's when I started thinking about it. There's one caretaker for it, and it's basically all the Jewish stuff from the Jewish community who had lived there and left. And they weren't forced out, they just moved away for better. And so you go in the classroom and there's just stacks of stuff from classrooms for who knows how many years. It's like a hoarder's room. And you go to the living room and it's like a hoarder's room of stuff that would be in your living room. You go to the kitchen, it's a hoarder stuff. And it's just it's the entire remnant of the village that lived here for hundreds of years, probably. And just like in Everything is Illuminated, they may have even got the idea of Everything is Illuminated from this museum stuff. So that was also spectacular. Flossie, sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, no, please, Rabbi. This is your show.
This is everybody's show.
Minor players here. I'm thinking, and I don't know if it's on view or what, when we heard the story about the paper clips.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a place to visit? Or
It is. You can go visit, and they have the paper clips there. It's a small town. I don't think it's that far from here either. What city is it?
Tennessee, is it?
Tennessee. It's in Tennessee, yeah.
Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Because we looked into going there. Let's see. Yeah, so I've seen the movie. I saw the movie, obviously. I saw, but yeah, I think it's a big children's
Rabbi.
There's a documentary about it.
Oh, okay. You didn't say it.
So it's in, what city is this in? It's in Butterfly, Whitewell or Whitwell, Tennessee.
We saw that
Yeah,
one.
I think it's on the grounds of a public school.
Yeah, have you been there, Ron?
No, but we saw the movie.
They brought an original boxcar over from Germany.
That's right. There's a movie about that.
Yeah, that's the whole film is about bringing the
Yeah.
boxcar over and then they had originally intended to get, 6 million. The whole idea was to get 6 million of something, just to give people the concept of what 6 million lives would have been lost. And they used paper clips as the idea, and they asked for donations, from paperclip factories. And they stuffed the boxcar with 6 million of these things, just to give you an idea of the school children, of trying to give them a concept of what the number 6 million could have looked like. I mean,
Wow.
6 million is like if they took one school, which had 1,000 kids in it every day for like 30 or 40 years, and they had annihilated that school, that would be almost like 6 million, just to try and put it into perspective.
No.
Yes, I don't know if you're interested in any of this stuff, but I've got all my father's World War II memorabilia, even his dog tag that has
That would
the
be kind of,
like,
yeah, I
Yeah.
bet that would really be, that is not always easy to come by, because obviously they're very preserved
it
living.
has so much information, and there was a family that saved him and hid him in the children's closet.
Oh, he was
because
he was in Europe.
Yeah,
I thought you meant
and this, I just don't know what to do with it. Do you have any use for
Well,
any
if
of
you
it there?
If you survived the Holocaust, I would call the Holocaust Museum in Houston first thing and see if they are, since you're in that area.
Well, he was a Holocaust survivor.
Oh, was he in
No.
did he serve in the U.S. Army?
Yes.
Oh, US Army. That's a good question. Where would you? I would call and see either to some Jewish organizations, or maybe call the New Orleans World War II Museum. That's a close one.
Got everything. This is wonderful stuff.
Also, there's a lot of veterans museums who would love to get that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, I've searched everywhere. I mean, it's incredible. It even has permission to bring back a German Luger, and
That's
it
cool.
just has all this information. And I just feel like it needs to be where other people can see it. And even the box that Dan was carved with all the places he served.
That's pretty cool. I think that's something to see about putting in the music. There may be museums in Houston even that are interested, but there's the big World War II museum in New Orleans. There's also the national stuff, and I would talk to some of the Jewish organizations in town, see if they're interested.
Yeah, I just can't find anybody.
Yeah, the Jewish war veterans, I would think, if you could
That's a
find
great
one of
idea.
the
They do
local
have-
organizations, the Jewish war veterans. And
They do have a
It's Florence
chapter.
coming, Ollie.
Okay. Well, it's just incredible that it lasted all these years and it became mine. And it's just wonderful stuff.
Yeah, and you also
And
want to
other people would love to see this.
yeah, there's some more archival organizations that may do it as well. All right.
Jewish war veterans.
Yeah, I would call it. That's a good idea. That'd be first who I'd call. But I haven't worked with them in a while, and obviously in Houston. So we went a little over time, no worries. So next week we will be meeting online. That is November 3rd. And we're going to look at Jewish depictions in classic literature, stressing The Merchant of Venice and Dickens' Oliver Twist. And so it won't be required, but if you've read any of those, we'll talk about what the description of Jews were, why it was this way, and then where those original ideas came from. Larry.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention if you go on YouTube, you can get a link to a very, very fine version of The Merchant of Venice if you're having trouble reading it, which Al Pacino was in. And I think it's the full-length version of, so you could see the entire play.
That's a good idea.
So it's probably a good idea to try and at least see one version.
I can't find any stuff around now. I don't have as many books as Larry, but I have almost as many.
Well, what I would do is You can order them online, or I'm happy to do it for you. And just give me your address. We can send you one. So there's also, they have the translations that are easier to read for people like me who are not Shakespeare aficionados. I've read only a couple of the books.
Yeah, you do want to read the speech, I think, the Shylock speech, if a Jew is cut, does he not bleed? If a Jew is this, he does not. I think that's one of the most important speeches, which we want to discuss, to see if, what Shakespeare's attitude was toward Jews.
And I think everyone knew that speech came from Shylock as of 3 seconds ago.
There's a good
I know
summary.
that.
There's a really good summary of the Merchant of Venice on Wikipedia. Just type in Merchant of Venice and go to the Wikipedia site. It's very short and it's good. And,
I have read Oliver
and
Twist.
you can get and Kindle. I was wrong last week. I said it was free. It cost me 62 cents to get the Merchant of Venice, which really kind of pisses me off because I have a complete works of Shakespeare, or had a complete works of Shakespeare somewhere in the house, and I thought I had downloaded it to, another one on Kindle. So I got rid of the written book. I'm trying to get rid of books. We got too many books. So anyway,
I'll
too
send
much
you some of
information.
mine, Michael.
I have plenty of books if you want some too. I got plenty of them. I don't even read anymore. Written word is
Yeah,
over.
there's
Flossie.
Netflix.
On your
Might
mute,
ask-
Flossie.
You might
I
ask
had
Jennifer
seen you
to,
after your class last week, and you were saying you would send a list of books with a Jewish content you recommend reading.
Now, do you want me to
movies.
just, I'll send that today. That's a good idea. Well, I'll send it out with the list.
And I was just going to add, please, if you could maybe send some of the museums you didn't mention, but some museums around the world that we should all live and be well and be able to travel to all these,
Amen. Hopefully in the future.
but at
did
least
notice-
we have a list to work on. Thank
I
you.
did notice that Jennifer still has the Weight of Ink, or whatever the title was of that book.
Yeah, I'll have it change. I forgot to change her. I just sent her yesterday after that, the updated of everything. So that's my bad.
I'll send out the links.
I have 2 copies of that book now. It's just really long for.
I'll send out the link if I could find it for the free Al Pacino movie on YouTube. That you
Oh,
can
thanks.
watch.
Appreciate that. And if anybody needs anything else, let me know. In case you're wondering, tonight at the Jewish Federation, it's free. They have a comedian as the headliner as they start the campaign. You have to sign up for free, but his name is Benji Levin, an old friend of mine. He's going to be doing a comedy set from Israel. So highly recommended. So free, just go on to the Jewish Federation. You can sign up for it. And we also do have services Friday and Saturday. And Saturday's Torah study is going to be moved to 12:30, I believe. We're going to try it in the building and on Zoom as well.
Oh.
All right. Safe trip. Oh, wait, nobody's going where? Safe. Stay safe. How's that? Stay safe, everyone. My high school reunion is this weekend that I'm missing. So it's really problematic. I could bring my really beautiful wife and my 2 really cute kids just to say, there in your face, that's what you do at a reunion, right? So you do it hopefully next year. Hopefully the next one in 5 years. All right, you guys stay safe. And as always, it's awesome to see you. And schedule I'll send out to the email. And then look forward to seeing you guys. Have a good one.
Thank you very much. everybody. Thank you.
Everybody say hi to Steve, by the way. Didn't get to meet. Oh, there's Sheila. And Sheila, I can't see who's with Sheila. Is that Paula? Good to see you guys. I can barely see. Stay safe, everybody. You're on mute, Sheila.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for the note, Sheila, by the way. She's the one who figured out that I had it wrong.